Hi guys, welcome back to another LaserDisc video, and today is going to be a little bit longer. We'll be looking at a box set series, the Thin Man collection, rather than just an individual movie. Talking just briefly about each one, give you a general idea of what they're about, hopefully, so you'll go and check them out. If you're a LaserDisc collector, this is an amazing box set. It doesn't go for a whole lot, it seems to be fairly common. Definitely worth getting, and if you're not a LaserDisc collector, I'm hoping just these brief little snippets about these movies without giving away too much of their storylines, not too many spoilers. I want you to really watch them for yourselves. They are available on DVD in multiple forms individually, or there's another box set. I don't know if they're available on Blu-ray, no idea about that, but I know DVD and LaserDisc, you can grab them here. And the first movie, The Thin Man, is available on its own as part of the Diamond Jubilee collection on LaserDisc, which I have over here. Right here. So the first one is, and I believe the first one is the only one that is actually available individually. So I'm going to talk about the box set here. So the first movie here, The Thin Man, directed by W.S. Van Dyke and starring William Powell and Myrna Loy as Nick and Nora Charles. Nick Charles is a longtime private detective who is fairly famous within certain circles. He's well known amongst the police, and there's a running gag throughout all these different movies about all these people from the underbelly that always know Nick. You walk into a room, and there's, oh hey Nick, this is Slim, this is whatever, and he set me up the river once, and they talk about, oh, Nick, you know the most lovely people because he knows all these people from the seedy underbelly, but most of them don't hold grudges because he's just such an interesting, fascinating guy, and he makes friends throughout all these movies, and it's just a fun running gag through all the different movies there. So Nick is now decided to pretty much retire from being a private dick, from being a gumshoe, because now he's married to Myrna Loy's character Nora, who is a wealthy heiress, and they're pretty much retired, living in San Francisco. The first movie has them coming to New York for the Christmas holidays, and it starts off as a traditional murder mystery film noir pre-code movie. In a very wonderful sense, all the movies are that way and have a familiar structure, but the draw is actually not really the murder mystery element. As interesting as those are, some more than others depending on which movie you're talking about, the real draw absolutely is Nick and Nora, and their relationship and the wonderful combination of William Powell and Myrna Loy, just that beautiful combination, the way they work together so well, is done so fantastically that the first film was actually nominated for Best Picture, and it's something that has inspired countless works, particularly on TV. Many shows throughout the 70s and 80s in particular kind of used a lot of elements from this, trying to recapture that magic, but never quite doing it. And it's referenced many times, sometimes not as noticeably, even as recent as the most recent thing I can think of is the movie Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. Nick and Nora are actually named Nick and Nora after the characters from the Thin Man series. So they are very beloved classics, particularly the first film. And in this one, Nick is eventually dragged into yet another case, another investigation after he's decided to retire, and he's all but kicking and screaming dragged into this situation as it involves a former client of his who has gone missing, and he's dragged him mostly by the client's daughter, and then of course Nora really kind of is enticed by the excitement of wanting to see Nick work. She was like, Nicky, I want you to take this case, and she kind of drags him into it a little bit too, and that's a common theme throughout majority of the series, as well as her wanting to explore the excitement and see him at his A game, and really just that's why she's proud of him, and she really married someone outside of her circle and really wants to see him at work and see the things that excite her about him, and she gets a little more involved as the series goes on. But this one in particular, the original movie, which is insane, it was filmed in a little over 2 weeks, which is just incredible for how wonderful the dialogue is in this and how well the scenes play out. Pulp Fiction is a movie I think is referenced constantly as far as looking at just brilliant dialogue. And as far as wonderful, witty dialogue, though, I would say The Thin Man, the series in general, but the first one specifically, destroys it. Even so far beyond a film that has a fantastic dialogue, that is well known for its dialogue, this beats it. It's so spectacular to watch, and in fact, to the point where, as much as it is an interesting murder mystery, My favorite scene in the whole thing, well, favorite two scenes really, is the Christmas party and the morning after, and just the relationship and the banter, the back and forth, and the real draw throughout all these movies is Nick and Nora. And what's so wonderful and fascinating and just a joy to watch between the two of them, not only is it so hilarious, not only does it feel so real, it feels almost like they feel like a genuine couple. It feels like genuine love off screen, and you really believe their characters, and they're just a joy to watch. What's great is that when you think of love and romance and relationships in film, the vast majority of the time it's one or two camps. It's either the most common of all, falling in love, and it's a story about people coming together, falling in love, frequently hating each other at first and then falling in love later on, and it's sort of them realizing their love and their relationship, and the coming together is usually the climax of that story. Or it's the other one where it's about forbidden love or love falling apart and the tragedy of love. That's the bulk of movies. When you really think about stuff that's focused on a relationship, it's very infrequently that you find, especially a well-done movie, that's not about the beginning or ends of love, but about a married couple who stays married, happily married, throughout the course of all 6 of these movies. It is about a couple not falling in love or falling out of love, but just in love. It's about that solid, stable, married couple, and it works so well, and that's something that's just not very common. And for something that's not very common, it's even less common to find it done so perfectly as within these movies. And that, if you really are interested in that idea, that it really works very well. If you're interested in that idea, watch these, even just for that aspect. Even if you're someone who, if you're not really into 30s and 40s pictures, if you're not into film noir, if you're not really super into murder mysteries, this might even still appeal to you, particularly the first one, because it's really that relationship is just done so well that I think it can appeal to people who are not necessarily into its core genre. It works wonderfully as a fantastic comedy. And as far as the murder mystery elements, the first 3 movies are actually based off of a book called The Thin Man. The first movie in particular is based a little more specifically off that book, and it does follow a structure that's set up by the first film of getting drawn in against his will, Nick getting involved in a case, and then Nora getting herself involved, sometimes more than others depending on the film, and then just him begrudgingly making his way through the case, and you find all these clues and all these interesting, fascinating little red herrings and twists and turns, and then when everything just kind of comes together, there's always at the end of every picture, in the first one, it's a dinner party to where everyone who's involved, all the different characters, sometimes as much as like 20 people in a room, all come together, and through a conversation, Nick solves the mystery then and there, and really just puts all the pieces together, pits people against each other, and people say things they didn't mean to, they kind of crack under the pressure, and that climax, especially in this first one, it comes off just so beautifully. It's great. It has a brilliant sense of tension, it has endless witty banter, and just a great comedic timing that it just constantly flows. And every one of these movies has that same structure to where there's no dead air, there's really no time that you want things to move on, or you think it went in a direction where something should have been cut, or it has a constant perfect flow to the dialogue that really, because the dialogue is what's driving the narrative throughout the entire picture, and it's true for all of these, that it makes the entire picture just have a consistent non-stop flow where it works beautifully, one thing falling into the other, and just lots of hilarious little gags and things that work very, very well. And I mentioned, because talking a little bit more about the first one, how things work best in the first one, it is because as good as some of the later ones are, and a couple of them are almost as good as the original, it does stay very, very true to that formula. And it's a bit of a mixed bag. It kind of depends on your opinion of that, to where sticking to that formula kind of creates its style. It creates what a Thin Man movie is, and it really creates that reliance on Nick and Nora, and also the side characters, the secondary characters work very well, and how they interact with them. The formula really keeps the focus on what makes these movies great without trying to stretch it. But at the same time, after a while, I could also see some people not liking the idea that it is very formulaic, that each movie does have the same structure, really. So it really depends on what you like, but I think that they're done so well, with one exception I'll get to. They're done so well that I actually think it works in the series' favor, which is unusual for me to say. I think a lot of times sticking with that formula and not really taking chances works against a series. Eventually, as it goes on, some of the sequels become derivative. But with this, I don't think it ever really hit that point. I think there's so much great comedy and relationships, and it changes it up enough as far as the setting and the type of crime, that I think it keeps it fresh and still works really, really well. And the structure is actually a little bit more of a comfort, really, as you're watching these movies. The Thin Man came out in 1934 and was a massive success. So in 1936, we got After the Thin Man, a direct sequel. It picks up right where the last one left off, when they're getting off the train back home to San Francisco, and we are introduced to Nora's side of the family, which is an interesting way to add another layer to the dynamic of Nick and Nora, which is really the focus of the series. You had the first movie, which is really all about them, the two of them. That really is the core structure of that story and of the relationship. But in this one, we get introduced to Nora's aristocratic family, who does not necessarily approve of their marriage, and of Nick himself, because he comes from a very different place. That Nora really has an appeal to Nora very much, and she really enjoys that side of Nick. But there's always this little bit of her past coming through, and you really get a better idea of their relationship and the history of their relationship in this one. And there's an even bigger role for their dog Asta, which I don't think I mentioned their dog before, but Asta plays a huge part in every one of these movies. He's actually kind of a third character. He is another member of the family, really, and he is played usually for comedic value, and it's very cutesy, but done well. It's not never really overdone, I don't think, and he actually adds something, and you see some interesting an interesting dynamic sometimes with how Nick and Nora talk to and relate to Asta and their relationship with the dog. It actually adds and doesn't take away, and I think sometimes some movies, when they add that cutesy element, a pet or a baby or like a young child, occasionally it actually takes away from the adult relationship and just adds a humorous factor that doesn't quite hold up. But here, it's done very, very well. And again, it's Nick gets involved in another case, because it does involve family. Family doesn't necessarily get along with, but it's Nora's family, so he has to get involved. It involves a missing husband, who it turns into another murder mystery. It turns into a money laundering scheme and everything, and it really comes together very, very well in a typical story structure and style for these movies. But the second one, I think, is just as good as the first. I prefer the first a little bit more because it just comes together so flawlessly that you could not redo that any better. You can try and match it, but this comes as close to matching it as you possibly could with a sequel. It's an incredibly well done sequel, and I do think it actually, as far as the murder mystery element, there's a few more layers in this one than the first one, but at the same time, bits of the solution are far more obvious, I think, when you first watch it, as compared to the first one. I think it's a little bit harder to figure out the first time you're watching it, which makes that big reveal at the end when you get everyone in the room and that type of thing a little more interesting, because you're a little more... You really relate more to Nora, to Myrna Loy's character, where she's like anxious to what's happening, what's the answer, I really want to find out. And this one, you're a little bit less anxious because you figured out bits and pieces, but there is a little bit more to this one. It's a little bit meatier as far as the murder mystery element. So I think in some ways it's a little bit better, in other ways it's not quite the match of the first movie. So I definitely think the first movie is the best. It is definitely the classic, but this is pretty close. And then we move into the third movie. In 1939, we got the third film in the series, Another Thin Man, another brilliant murder mystery. They do introduce a baby. They do have a baby in this one, and he actually adds to the plot and the relationship in a very positive light. Like I said, many times when we introduce that character, or I've seen time and time again, to where as the series evolves, as it would logically, you have characters meeting each other, falling in love, or they're already in love, they get married, and then a few sequels later, they have a kid. And a lot of times, that's sort of the jump the shark moment when the series kind of falls off a bit. Even with some older series, it's like, yeah, but for the first couple seasons before they started having kids, it wasn't quite as good. And that really happens a lot, I feel like. but in this one it doesn't at all. Them having the child actually adds to the plot in many different ways. Another great film, and again, I'm trying to spoil a little bit less as I go through each one. My intention with these is not to go through and do a step-by-step review within these LaserDisc videos and go through every little plot point and whatever. I really more want to share my joy and love of these pictures, or if it's something I watch for the first time, give you a first impression of that movie. But these, I really want to spread the love and positivity and like really show why I enjoy these things, and in the hopes that you will go and seek them out for yourself, because these are things that I feel, especially within my age group, just about 31 here, they're not really well known. I guarantee if I went and talked to all my friends, maybe 2 would have even heard of them, but it's really, that's my intention, so I don't want to give out too much, give you a general idea of where the series goes to, and as far as the quality, because then we end up with one that I think is a little bit, one of the weaker in the series. We have Shadow of the Thin Man, which is still a fantastic movie. I mean, saying a slightly weaker Thin Man movie is still better than most comedies in general. Really, really good. It does actually, this is the first time that I feel that they do address Nick's alcoholism. Well, he's very clearly an alcoholic, and it's done even through this one still as a comedic part of the character, and it's actually really adds a lot to the humor of the series. But you get a little bit more of a hint here now that their child's starting to grow up a little bit more of a little bit of the negative aspects of it. It doesn't really go into it in a very dramatic style. It's not about alcoholism in that sense, but it does actually take a little bit more time to address the fact that, yeah, it makes the movie and the character more interesting, and it really just adds something, but he's still an alcoholic. Like, it still adds a little bit to it here, and that carries on a little bit more into The Thin Man Goes Home. And in this one, we get a murder mystery in Nick's hometown, because we, a couple movies back, and After the Thin Man, met Nora's side of the family. Now we're going to meet Nick's side of the family, who's out in a rural town, and it's a little town where everyone knows him, and you get a good sense of his past and his childhood, and just like in After the Thin Man, it adds to their relationship and adds to their characters. And it's interesting that several movies in, we're still adding to that understanding of who they are and who they were, and it really adds more to the characters, and you love it. And this actually, to me, there's something about this one, The Thin Man Goes Home, that I've really, really loved, and I didn't expect to, because it still has that same the same formula, it's still the same type of story structure and things like that. And I really thought that 5 movies in, especially after the 4th one, which was still really great, but, you know, a B+, I'd say, on the scale, versus the, you know, first 3, which are an A to an A+. I really thought that it was going to fall off at this point. When I very first saw these, I really thought that here's the point where it's not as good. And this one, I don't think it's the second best movie in the series. I think it actually, the first 3 are kind of in order of, the first one's the best, second one's second best, third one, and then you kind of pick and choose these last 3. But it is actually my second favorite in the series. There's something about this and Nick's journey home, and something about the mystery within this one that really appeals to me personally, to where I really, really enjoyed, and I felt a little bit more, I think, more of an emotional attachment, more of an interest, I think, in much of the supporting cast in this one. In many other ones, it's really just what those characters add to Nick and Nora themselves that makes those characters interesting in most respects. But in this one, while that is still very true, I do think that I really kind of wanted to know more about the backstory and was more interested in some of the secondary characters in this one more than I was in others. And seeing Nick's relationship with his father and different that also had a personal connection for me. That just that element, I think, won't connect with everyone in the same way, but for me, that father-son relationship really connected with me for personal reasons and things like that. So I really, really love this one, and I think it maintains the quality of the series. And I do think that The Thin Man Goes Home is actually better than the prior movie, Shadow of the Thin Man. I think it really brings it back in full form for one last hurrah. Now we're up to 1947, and the series started in 1934, so we have a long span of time by the time we get to the 6th movie, Song of the Thin Man. And Song of the Thin Man, again, follows that same familiar story structure, but it's just, to me, I don't know why this one, it doesn't fall flat, but it hits a lot of the same notes, a lot of, not repeat jokes or anything like that, but so much of it feels very familiar, and I think this is finally the one where that familiarity could be taken in a negative light. It's still a good movie. You know, if I were, you know, just sticking with talking about like how good they are as far as like a rating, like out of 10. And obviously, the first movie, 10 out of 10. You know, after the Thin Man, I would give the second movie maybe like a 9 out of 10. Third one, again, probably close to a 9. Shadow of the Thin Man, maybe like a 7 or an 8. Then the Thin Man Goes Home, another 9. This one, like a solid 7. It's still a very good movie, and it is, especially if, I think in many ways it's made for people who are fans of this series. It really feels in many ways like one last little end cap to put a wrap on the series, and it feels like it's made just specifically for fans of the series to remember how much they enjoy this relationship, get one last adventure, and really just experience and remember your love of Nick and Nora and the series as a whole. But on its own, it doesn't stand up as much as the other ones. The other movies, you obviously get a lot more out of them if you watch them in order, but they also work perfectly fine as a standalone, and they're great in their own right. Individually, they're all really good movies. But this one, I feel like you wouldn't appreciate anywhere near as much unless you had watched the previous 5 movies up to this point. It really feels like something made for fans of the series, and it's not quite as good. It's still, again, a very good murder mystery comedy, but it doesn't hold that same brilliant classic appeal. It just feels like yet another Thin Man movie, and it moves into that territory. And I think I'm glad it stopped here, because even if they had just done one more, like even just, you know, the next year they wrapped up one quickly and put another one out, I feel like this is the point where it would have just gone downhill from here. And I'm glad it stopped here. But I'm glad it exists, because it is yet another look into those characters, and there are good elements to this one. But overall, it's definitely it ends on a little bit of a weak note in comparison to the other ones. But again, same with like Shadow of the Thin Man, which I do like a little bit better in this one. Saying a slightly weaker Thin Man movie is still better than, you know, most movies you're gonna find out there. So a brilliant box set. It includes all these movies. There's just so much more I could talk about them. I mean, it's a series of 6 movies, ones that I really, really enjoy. I could talk about each one for half an hour apiece if I was really going through bit by bit and talking about them. But yeah, just with this one in particular, with this video, I really wanted to just share my love of this series and give you a general idea of what they are about and why they're so good, without giving too much away, because they are really fun. If you haven't seen them before, it is the same fun as in most kind of murder mystery type things. Part of the fun is in not knowing what's going to happen next and going through those little twists and turns and red herrings and exploring the mystery for that first time. There's nothing like, I mean, these movies are great in repeat viewing, especially the first one, and for me personally, the 5th one. But there's nothing like watching them the first time. And I think any murder mystery movie is like that. There's anything of that structure, and especially with a comedy murder mystery and not necessarily seeing some of the lines coming, some of the beats coming. There's nothing like watching them the first time. So I don't want to take away from that and give you too much, but I want to explain why they're so great. And I really hope you check these out, and I hope you take to heart, if you're not a fan typically, or haven't had much exposure to movies from the 30s and 40s, or, you know, film noir, or you're not a huge murder mystery person, even if those are not things that necessarily typically appeal to you, I really hope you do understand that I'm saying you don't necessarily have to be a fan of those things to enjoy these. They're good enough, they stand on their own, that you're going to enjoy them a lot more if you like those things, obviously. But I think in particular the first one, which no matter what, that should be the one you look for. Look for the Thin Man, and it's easiest to find, and it's definitely the best standalone. It's best, you know, way to start, because it's the first movie. Watch that and see if you like it, and then hunt down the rest of the series if you like it, because I think its appeal is beyond its time. Its appeal is beyond its genre. I really think that you had the perfect partnership. You had lightning in the bottle with William Powell and Myrna Loy, and I think it really just made both of them shine. It showed what both of them were best at, particularly with Myrna Loy, who spent the first, you know, like good chunk of her career being shoved in roles that really weren't her strength, and she finally was able to play to her strengths and be the character that she could be, and she got to be in many other movies after these. But I think this is really, if I were to pick either actor this would be the first thing this is the first thing I think of with either of them, even with, you know, William Powell, who I love, you know, My Man Godfrey and things like that. But for both of them, this is the first thing I think of when I think of the two of them. They're the perfect pairing, and they're one of my favorite couples, and one of my favorite couples in movie history. They work so well, so go find these. I've rambled on forever talking about how great they are. Find them. If anything I said, you know, gives you an idea that they might appeal to you, find them, especially just finding the first movie by itself on LaserDisc or DVD, just, you know, easy to find, super cheap movie, and a brilliant classic, and the beginning to a legendary series.